assuming John would go along with us, would rather make this interactive than just talking at you. So if you have questions, please ask. The nice thing about asking the judge a question here is you never have to see me again. You don't have to worry about what my answer is. But it's also true vice versa. Now that I'm retired, when you ask a question, you're liable to get a straight answer. So I started in 1979 as a juvenile judge. Since that time, things have changed. And a lot of what I do now is trying to make up for the mistakes I made early in my career, when I just listened to the experts instead of listening to the families. When I listened to service providers instead of listening to the community. So I have been doing things since I retired to try to make up for that. And it goes hand in hand with the fact that Karan doesn't like to brag about herself. She was a caseworker for 15 years. Then she took over the Tribal Family Service Program as director. At that point, they had 487 kids in foster care, for a consortium of 7 tribes. In January, the total number of kids in foster care was 6. And they did that by doing things differently. And that's what we're going to be talking about. Is I'm going to give you an introduction to what child welfare is like in the rest of the country. And then Karen's going to show you that success is possible. And I think Donald is going to challenge you to do something with your careers and your lives to follow up on that. So, today, there are 450,000 kids in foster care. That's twice the number from the 1980s. Good save. The number used to be a few years ago 500,000. It started to come down, and now it's on its way back up again. So that's 450,000 kids who are essentially unclaimed by the system. And if you think government or the system does a good job raising kids, we need to have a long talk. One of the people that I heard testimony from in a case a number of years ago, he was on the stand for 2.5 days. He was cross-examined by 6, 7 different lawyers, and it was Dr. Samuel Roll. And his assessment that I have come to agree with is that all but the worst, very worst, families are better off raising their own kids than we are putting kids into the system. So 800,000 will be in foster care sometime this year in this country. Twice the number from the 1980s. And the average child spends 2 years in foster care and goes through 3 different placements. 20% of the kids spend over 5 years in foster care. So the problem is that if you've ever spent a day in foster care, your odds of completing a college degree are less than 2%. It's become almost the norm in national child welfare conferences to have a former foster youth stand up, talk about how well their life is going. They're a college graduate, they've done wonderful things with their life. And those young people are truly extraordinary. Why should you have to be extraordinary to go to college? Why shouldn't that just be a choice that every other young person makes? Do I go to the military? Do I get a job? Do I go to college? Do I raise a family? Those are choices that people have. Why should you have to be extraordinary to think that you can go get a college degree? So a few years ago, Casey Family Programs did a survey of kids who had been in foster care and were out. So the average age of the people taking the survey was 24 years old. what they found was that 54% were diagnosed with major mental health disorders. 25% with PTSD, post-traumatic stress. Well, that's twice the rate of Vietnam vets. Vietnam was my era. Since then, it's been Afghanistan and Iraq, which are similar numbers. But foster kids have twice the rate of PTSD. If you think about it, that's not all that surprising. The hallmark of Vietnam vets with PTSD, never feeling safe, never knowing who the enemy was, never being able to relax, never feeling valued, never feeling heard. Very much the story that kids in foster care tell, if you bother to listen. 20% were diagnosed with a major depression, 17% with a social phobia. You have a higher unemployment rate, 17% were in public assistance, 33% were at or below the poverty level, and 33% had no health insurance. And that's if you had ever spent a day in foster care. The problem is, though, it goes beyond just spending the day in foster care. 23,000 kids will age out of foster care this year. Simply graduate out of foster care without a family around them. Now that's a predictable outcome from our system. That number has been between 22,000 and 27,000 for the last 15 years. This is a predictable outcome of what we do in the child welfare system. 23,000 kids without a family, without a support system. And when I started as a judge in the 1970s, that was our goal. Just get these kids to 18. We figured if we got them to 18, that was a success. Well, the problem is that when you look at the outcome for those kids, it doesn't look much like success. Aging out of the system carries risks. I mean, I like to think that I was 18 or 19, I could make good decisions for myself. I didn't need to listen to anybody else. I am so lucky. There are people who are going to tell me what I needed to hear, whether or not I wanted to hear it. But how would it be to have nobody in your corner? Nobody that you knew really cared. I mean, you talk to the kids in foster care. I served on the Pew Commission on Children in Foster Care. One of the things we heard from the kids over and over and over is, I may have the most wonderful foster parents, but I know why there's food on the table and there's a place for me to sleep at night, and that's because they're being paid to. Now, even if you have the most angel-like foster parents, it's still hard to accept the fact that you're there because somebody's paying them to take care of you. That's different than if you have a family, even if you don't get along with your family. So if you're 18 or 19 and you don't have support system, you don't have friends, you don't have your own network, how do you learn from your mistakes? How do you pick yourself up and keep going? How do you survive without having your own set of cheerleaders? Without somebody to say, you know, you screwed up the last 3 times, but I still believe in you. If you don't have somebody who can say that, it's hard to keep going. I can remember talking to one young man who told us on the Pew Commission that he tried and he messed up. And he tried and he messed up and he tried again and he screwed up, so he figured he was just a screw up, so why try? Foster care has become an intergenerational problem. By the time I left the bench, I was seeing 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation kids in foster care. What that tells us is we didn't do a very good job when we had their great-grandparents. We didn't do a very good job when we had their grandparents, and we didn't do any better when we had those parents. So what makes us think it's going to be any different today? I mean, what's the layman's definition of insanity? Do the same thing over and over and hope for a better result? If
If we want a better result, we need to consider doing something different rather than just going along with the program. And that's one of the things I admire about Karen's program, is that she started the program not believing she had the answers already. One of the things that she likes to brag to me about is she didn't get her master's until after she'd been running that program for a number of years. She told me that if she had her master's, she might have thought the answer was in a book somewhere. Instead, she talked to the families, she talked to the communities, and figured out one by one with each family how to help. We have gotten to the place in this country where we've put our child welfare system onto an automotive kind of work line. We have specialists in intake, and we have specialists in investigation, and we have specialists in reunification, and we have specialists in placement, and we have specialists in adoption. What that does for the family, though, is you learn that you can't really trust that this worker is really invested in you or that they're going to stick around for very long. I hate to say it, the last numbers I saw for the average career life of new social workers is about 23 months. That's why I'm trying to give you the good and the bad up front, so when you're making decisions, you know what you're getting into. But the upside is success is possible if you choose to make that your priority, as opposed to just following the rule and checking the boxes. So in order to keep getting up when life knocks you down, you need somebody by your side. None of us who have gotten towards the back end of our lives have gotten this far without having somebody around us, not once, not twice, but many times. And it's unrealistic to expect from the system that you're going to be perfect and then we'll leave you alone. Nobody gets through life that way. And it's unrealistic for us to expect that. And one of the values of tribal communities is that you have extended family. You have relatives who maybe aren't even your relatives. I grew up with aunties and uncles who I'm really not related to, but they're part of my family, and I knew if I needed something, they were there. That's the kind of support system that can breed success, as opposed to you were responsible for doing it on your own, and I got my eyes on you because when you screw up, I'm going to take your kids. That is not conducive to either asking for help, listening to help when it's offered, or believing that you can succeed. And if you don't have all three of those, you're not going to make it. So the problem is really on two levels. That was just part of it. The other part is the 23,000 kids who are going to age out of that system, almost 2/3 will be homeless, in jail, or dead within 2 years. When I saw that number, I realized that our goal of getting kids to 18 was illusory. That was not success. That was simply kicking the can down the road. If we want to succeed, we have to do better than that, which means we can't simply say our job is to get you to 18. Second level, though, are the stories. Those are just the numbers. Pew Commission, we held hearings around the country. We listened to the experts, but we also listened to the kids. One 16-year-old told us that every day he came home from school to his foster home, the first thing he did was look to see if his stuff was packed in garbage bags by the front door. He had been moved so often that he didn't know in here where he was going to spend the rest that night, and that was the way he looked at every night. I mean, we all know that plans change, that we have to adapt. We may have a friend or a family member who needs help. We may have a medical problem that comes up with somebody that we need to adjust. But how would it be to not know in here where you're going to spend the night, and then be that way every day, day after day, not knowing? Who gets the least amount of warning on a move from foster care? The kid. Who gets the least amount of preparation? The kid. Who gets the least amount of support? The kid. Who does it impact the most? The kid. And who do we help the least? The kid. Another story was a pair of twin girls who had been put in foster care at 12. They lived 20 miles down the road from each other, and they were 17, 20 miles down the road from each other, and had not seen each other in 2 years. And there was not a safety, social, or psychological reason why not. It just had not risen to the level of being important enough to somebody in the system to do that. And who is the longest relationship you're liable to have in your life? It's with your siblings. And especially when you start to consider the bond between twins. For them to live 20 miles down the road and not see each other in over 2 years, and there was not a reason why other than somebody's indifference. The only reason we found out is the commission would send staff a couple weeks in advance, and they'd interview the kids and get them ready to talk to the commissioners. And at the end, they asked this young girl, who else should we talk to? And they reported that in a very small voice, she said, how about my sister? So at the hearing, we brought both girls together. First time in 2 years, they had seen each other. We talked to one young man who is 3 months away from aging out of the system. He was almost 18. He had run away 20 times in the previous 24 months. And he was always found at his older brother's house. But his older brother was considered not to be an appropriate placement. So he was going to age out in 3 months. Where do you think he was going? Where do you think he was going? He was going to his brother's house. I mean, he told us he voted with his feet. We knew where he was going. But do you think there was a plan in place for him to go to his brother's house? No, the system thought it was going to be a bad place. If it was going to be such a bad place, why wasn't there a backup plan, a safety plan in place for him? But instead, he didn't want to do it the way they wanted him to do it, so they were going to have nothing to do with it. But probably the one that gets to me most was a 19-year-old young woman who told us that she was put in foster care at 2. She bounced around from foster home to foster home, and eventually into group homes, and then high-intensity group homes. Her caseworker told her when she was 13 that she would never, ever have her own family. She aged out of foster care at 18. She told us she was getting married at 19 and had nobody to walk her down the aisle. And the things that we take for granted for our kids, why are these kids entitled to less? Why don't we do for them what we would demand for our own? How can I have any intellectual integrity and look myself in the mirror if I said, if these were my grandkids, I would demand this and this and this, and no would not be an option. But I'm willing to walk away from somebody else's kids after one try. How is that a system that's fair? Or just? Or has any real chance of helping? At that hearing, the lieutenant governor from the state had been listening, and so he walked up and he offered to walk her down the aisle, which was a nice gesture. But still not the same as having a family member, somebody who loves you, do that. I can remember my youngest daughter's wedding. I walked her down the aisle, and then I turned around and I performed the ceremony for her. So that was double bonus for me. But how would it be to have nobody there for you? So from the kids' point of view, what they ask is, where is there a place for me at a Thanksgiving dinner table? Where is there a present for me under a Christmas tree? Who comes to my graduation, my wedding, the birth of my first child? All those hallmark kind of events. where do I go? Where is there a place for me? How would it be not to belong? And yet that's a predictable outcome of our system. And I teach judges now around the country, and I go through these numbers, and because I'm retired, I can speak bluntly. I tell them, if you're not an agent of change, you're complicit. Success is not guaranteed, but you got to be busting your ass trying. And if you're not, you're complicit in the result, which means that you accept the result as okay. If you can't believe that people can change, and if you can't believe that people can help, then you need to go do something useful with your life. Cure cancer, build a rocket, but being a social worker is not for you. But if you believe that people can change, and you're willing to walk that path with them, and you're willing to feel joy when they succeed, then this might really be a job for you. But one of the lines, again, I like from Karen's training and her evaluations as she hires new people is you have to have a tender heart and a thick skin. Because how many times can you jump on somebody, kick them to the curb before they stop believing that you're the one who really wants to help? So when I started as a judge, I assumed foster care was a good solution, that if we didn't know what was going on, foster care was a safe place to put kids while we figured it out. A just-in-case kind of a placement. Well, second, third, fourth generation have convinced me that this is not acceptable. I wouldn't accept it for my kids, for my grandkids, for my relatives, my neighbors, and even some strangers' kids. And the other thing is to keep in mind is that 75 to 80% of the kids in foster care are not there for abuse. They're not there for sexual or physical abuse. They're there for neglect. And neglect most often is a symptom of poverty, of being poor. So from our middle class position or upper middle class position, we can look down on our noses on people and say, you should be doing this, or you should be doing that, instead of getting down with them and say, how can I help? There's a difference. Again, the layman's definition of insanity, you do the same thing over and over and hope for a different result. Well, hope is not a strategy, and someday is not a plan. That means from day one, you got to start, and it's not going to be easy. If you're lucky, you have somebody like Karan as a supervisor. If you're not lucky, you end up like Donald did, having to fight the system. And I watched when he was a young worker, and as he grew in his career, and that system tried to beat him down because he still had a good heart and he wanted to help. But the system is not your friend. Your friend is when you find people who believe the same thing you do and keep you going. So a different approach, ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act, is a different approach. I tell people who want to know, well, why should these Indian kids be treated different? I ask them to flip that question around. Why should your kids get less? Why shouldn't every child be entitled to things like active efforts to help their family instead of just run-of-the-mill, whatever is available? Why shouldn't it be targeted to that problem? For example, you could have the very best substance abuse program in the world, but if it was in Bosnia, it wouldn't help very many people here. And yet that's what we continually do, is we match people to a service even when the service doesn't match them. And then who do we blame when it doesn't work? We blame them. Even though they're the experts in their lives and we chose not to listen to them, we'll blame them when it doesn't work. ICWA, extended family engagement, getting aunties and uncles and cousins and grandparents involved. I'll be real frank with you that when I grew up, if the system knew what was going on in my home, all my brothers and sisters and I would have been removed. No question. But if we'd been removed, I would have missed the most special person in my life. It's my grandmother. I used to spend the summers with my grandmother, and that's the only place I felt safe. My grandmother taught me that I could do anything. I didn't know that, but she did, and I believed her. She had that gift. I can remember when I was about 13 or 14 getting mad at her because I realized she was making all my cousins feel the same way. How could I be special if they were all special? But she wouldn't have been available as a placement because she heated and cooked on a wood stove. She didn't have a bathroom. She had an outhouse. She was poor. But I literally would not be standing here in front of you either as a judge or probably even alive, but for her. But for the fact that she believed in me and made me believe in myself. So if you had to ask me, would I rather get rid of all the garbage in my life early with the system and lose my grandmother, or put up with all that garbage and keep my grandmother? It's an easy choice. My grandmother's what got me here. But why should kids have to choose? Why can't we work to stop the nonsense and keep them connected to the people that they care about? That's what ICWA is about. It's trying to keep those connections, and if they're not there, to build them. Community support. This is one of the key elements of Karen's program. In most tribal communities, kids belong not just to mom and dad. They belong to the community, and actually, I think it's the other way around. The community and the adults belong to those kids. The kids have a right to expect that people will respond to them when they're in need. So it's not the Anglo-white system's version of ownership, but it's the flip side of who has a responsibility to these kids. And the more ties those kids have, the healthier they're going to be. Higher standard of proof for foster care and termination of parental rights. Why shouldn't everybody have a genuine chance to solve the problem instead of one chance? There are some states that if you don't follow through with your case plan, that's independent grounds to terminate parental rights. One case I had just before I left the Court of Appeals involved an illegal immigrant teenage single mom who had a premature child. The child had some health problems. Mom got frustrated, hurt the child went into foster care. Mom did everything that the counselors thought should be done. Even the court-appointed experts said, we think mom will be good for this child. Mom understands what happens. She now has a support system around her. She knows how to ask for help. We think she's going to be good. You know what the system's response was? They terminated her parental rights because she didn't complete 2 items on her case plan. She didn't get a job. Well, she's an illegal immigrant. She can't work legally. If she'd worked, she would have violated that part of the case plan that said, don't break the law. The second part she violated was she didn't pay child support. If you're not working, how are you going to pay child support? And they terminated her parental rights on that. And when I got to the Court of Appeals, I couldn't even get one of my colleagues to join me. People are used to the system. They just defer thinking to the system. So I'm going to urge you, when you become the workers, the line workers, then the supervisors, then the policymakers, don't give up your ability to think. The system is not better than people. Qualified expert witnesses, you need people who understand the family. And just because you're an expert in Detroit doesn't make you an expert at Navajo. Because you're an expert in Miami doesn't make you an expert in Bush, Alaska. Communities are different, families are different. And we've got to stop paying homage to letters after people's names. They either make sense or they don't make sense. They can either justify it by experience of success in working with this community, or they can say, I think this is the way to go. But when I started my career as a judge, I knew I didn't know what was going on. So if somebody walked in with an MSW or a PhD, I said, okay. I now realize how much of a mistake that was. A different approach can be successful, and that's where Karen's going to take over. 487 kids, 15 years later, 6.
So when I was younger and starting out my career as a caseworker, case manager, I remember listening to Judge Thorne. He was one of my first trainings. And I heard that statistic of foster care and what happened after they aged out, being homeless, in jail, or dead. And that's what really resonated me to start thinking differently on trying to change the system that we worked in and avoiding foster care altogether. Why were these kids even going into foster care? And I heard this story from Tilly Blackbear, an advocate for domestic violence, and she talked about the story about the 3 sisters. And these 3 sisters are walking down the forest, and they heard these babies crying. And there was a river next, and they went to the river, and they saw all these babies going down the river, floating toward a waterfall in treacherous waters. And so the first sister immediately jumps in and starts collecting those babies. And the second sister jumps in the middle of the river and starts teaching those babies how to flip over and float and doggy paddle. And then the third sister was going back upstream, and they said, hey, sister, where are you going? And she says, I'm going to go find out why these babies are falling in the river in the first place, and I'm going to stop it. And that's what made me start thinking differently in our program in stopping the reasons for these kids going into foster care. And it really was about making those connections and finding out what the families were and treating the families that they were the experts in their own lives. They knew what was going on, and they knew what they needed. And when you communicate with them and listen, real truly listen and have that and be okay with the silence and let them talk to you in their own time, you really learn a lot about them. And so we started changing the way we thought. And so one of the programs that we developed was the My Two Aunties program, because that was those sisters. There was 2 aunties, and somebody asked me, well, there were 3 sisters. I said, yeah, but the other sister is you, and your 2 aunties, the ones that hold you up. And so in the difference in that story, a lot of my mother's tribe is Kutsan from Fort Yuma, Arizona. And in their traditional practices of birthing, it was your aunts that held you up and took you to the birthing areas and helped you have your child. It wasn't your mother, it was your 2 aunts. And so with this program, go ahead, being that family focus, I really kept thinking about those 2 aunties. And also, your 2 aunties in Native communities are very, they're dangerous sometimes. They're vicious. You don't crush your aunties. Your auntie is like your second mother, second and third mother. And they will always take you in. They'll always feed you, clothe you, do whatever you need. They'll be there for special occasions, but they'll also shake your finger at you, pull you by the ear, sit you down, and make you really realize what you're doing if you're doing something wrong. So that's why we called that My Two Aunties program. It was really geared for women who were having children during pregnancy. And that's how we really flipped those numbers. And we got to the women, the families, and we focused on fathers as well. And had the program do family spirit a program from Johns Hopkins, and it was native based, and then we put it in our own native language, in the Luiseño language and Kumeyaay language. And we started teaching parenting skills and following the family for a year after they had their baby. And it really resonated, learning our stories and singing lullabies in our language to the babies. And that was the prevention. That was that third sister going up the stream and finding out, trying to prevent kids from falling into the river. And so I think that's what we did to lessen our numbers. So, in the program, we didn't want to be punitive. And when you're a social worker, you have to be okay with being well hated. Okay, you can't come into this job and think you're going to have friends with the families. There are reasons, historic reasons, why they're not going to like you when you knock on the door and say, hey, I'm here to evaluate you and give my opinion on whether or not you should parent your children. They're not going to like that. But if you talk to them, tell them, really be upfront, they're going to ask you, who are you? Who are you? Where are you from? Who are you to tell me about my parenting skills? What have you been through? And if you're a new social worker, and you're not a parent yet, they're going to question that too. So be ready for that answer. Say, I'm an auntie. That's your out, okay? Say, I'm an auntie, I'm a godmother, and just have that. Be ready for that. If you're looking for people to like you, it may not happen right away. I've been in many, many cases where we've been face to face, toe to toe, threatened to, I'm going to jump over that counter and wipe that grin off your face, that smile off your face. That's happened to me. But you know what? Later in life, you be real with that person. You tell them the way it is. You tell them what they're doing wrong, and make those suggestions and listen. They're going to become your best friend later on. Well, in my community, because I lived and worked in my community, and some of the people that I worked with were my own cousins and second and third cousins. So I have these other clients who are what I call my community social workers, because that same woman who threatened me, she's the auntie that brings her nephews and nieces by the ear into my office and sit down and say, Karen, you need to talk to him. He's not doing right. And so they make lifelong friends. I know Donald's been through that. Some of his clients bypassed our office and went straight to Donald from the county because he made those connections. And you will have those connections, and those are those really great cases that you're going to have, you're going to remember them. And I'm sure that person still calls you every now and again, doesn't she? Yeah, because Donald believed in her when nobody else did. She had probably 6 caseworkers before him. And so when you develop those relationships, make those connections, that's what social work is all about. You have to believe people can change. And if you don't, it's not going to work. But you have to listen. So healing, not punitive, creation of community-wide events. We kind of changed the system where it wasn't kind of us versus them with the county worker. We asked the county workers to be in all of our events, to be that face in our community, to be a part of our community, and they did. Donald came to many of our events, and his cases say, hey, gave him the chin up, how Indians do. Say, hey, Donald, you okay? They kind of move on. So we run into them a lot, but it's about those connections and being real, being human. So my 2 aunties, it was a homegrown, and one of the things that I'd like to do when people did come into, this is after the investigation, and there was a removal that was warranted. Many of them aren't. We developed a program where when we had a referral from the hotline, it came, and it was a tribal family from one of our 7 tribes, it came straight to our office, and we went out with the social worker. And we were really kind of played good cop, bad cop if we had to. But our effort was to not remove these children and find a way to work with the community services and not the county. Nothing against the county, but things against the county. And we asked them to work with us instead if they wanted to, if they didn't. But, many of the times, 98% of the time, there was not a reason for removal. A lot of them were mandated reporting, things that happened a long time ago, bad neighbors, bad relatives that, wanted to get back at somebody. But we eventually turned our program into that stigma of turning people in. Instead of that turning people in, it turned into getting people the help they need. So, and that was really hard to do because there was a big trust issue in Native communities with people who knock on your door from the government. So we were very successful in doing that and having the county go away, we got this, we'll work with them, or evaluating a lot of the cases out completely. But if we did have to work with them, we were the one consistent face that they had with the tribal social worker, because the county social worker would eventually change and change again and change again six times. But we stayed consistent. And I made sure that my caseworkers were a good fit for that family. And then after a while, as a director, I would meet with the family and say, hey, how's it going? Is my employee working with you okay? Are you guys getting along? Are you getting on with that case plan? Are you guys looking at, outside a different way of thinking? And is there anything else we can do for you? So you have to think in a different way and not just the way the system is. And those check boxes are real. Go beyond those check boxes. Have other line connections. Connections are everything for our Native community. So there is definitely a power in bringing families together and keeping those families, and they last forever. And those kids who go into foster care, they come back or they go home, but they always come back to us and say, hey, they become friends. We help them get jobs. They're in our community. We work with the community stores, people in the community, the tribal police, to watch out for them so that they don't become one of those statistics. Yep. Partnerships, the sheriff's office. The sheriff are trained on when a social worker comes onto the reservation. They will stop what they're doing. They'll say, hey, where's the tribal social worker? Because we've developed that protocol here in San Diego. And it's a written protocol that we worked on for 5 years because county people kept changing and the tribal councils kept changing. So we would have to kind of start all over again, but we didn't give up. So if kids do have to come into the system, then they don't have to go to the Polinsky Children's System to go through their assessment. They can come right to our community clinic. And then we did have, Phil likes this I call it the road worker syndrome. We had names for everybody. I hate to tell you that, We had one social worker we called Stink Eye. And we went toe-to-toe at one point, but after a while, she became one of my best buddies, that, and she knows that. We had Spaghetti Strap Girl, one that came to the reservation, little spaghetti straps, real cute and everything, and it was like, okay, we got to talk to her how to dress on the reservation. She's not going to get too far. But we had one worker who knew about our protocol to call the tribal social worker when there was an investigation. She waited until our office closed. And on a Friday night in the fall, it was dark, she went to the reservation after we were closed and was afraid. She was going to a spotty area, and so she called the sheriff. And so the sheriff accompanied her and he said, where's the social worker? Where's the tribal social worker? Oh, well, their office is closed. He goes, wait a minute. Got his walkie-talkie out, called tribal council, who is my cousin. He FaceTimed me. He said, hey, cuz, they're over at so-and-so's house. Okay, I'll be there in 3 minutes. Showed up. Could you imagine the look on her face? So we prevented those kids from going into foster care. She had a van. She had the appropriate size car seats for each of the children, the 3 children. She was ready to remove those kids and take them to the Polinsky Center when there was no need. Because Grandpa's house was right where that back door was his front door. There's no need for those kids to go into foster care. And that family is doing well now. So we share that kind of relationship, make those relationships, and you'll be surprised on who you can get, the store owners. Of course, your sheriffs and your tribal police and everything, but, your school administrators, people who watch out for kids. And so before even making our community, before making a report, they would just call our office, say, hey, I think so-and-so needs some help. They keep coming, to school, and they wash their clothes, and we let them wash their clothes and everything. And I said, well, there's nothing, wrong with that, but, yeah, we'll check it out. But we had a child protective team meeting every month, and we would go over families that were, in distress and everything. We'd go out and just offer that help. And so we were able to kind of build our community. Also with the protocol, we knew what was happening. We knew what was going on before it happened. And we were able to really change the face of child welfare in our community and not have removals anymore. Instead, they got the help they needed. We all need that help every now and again. So it's something that you have to always keep in mind. So we train everybody. We train judges, we train social workers, we offer to train within the county. Over there across the street is the Academy for Professional Excellence. We do the Tribal Star trainings, we've done the CRAs, we've done all the different things that the county does, and in turn we invite the county to the reservation to do what we do.
CRA's Cultural Responsiveness Academy,
Yeah,
right?
Cultural Responsiveness Academy, yep. They had a Native American track there, so we do those trainings as well. So just thinking outside those boxes. And I think Judge Thorne really went over this really well. I want to not take all the time and give Donald some time here.
Oh, you good.
So, yep. And so making those bridges with the services, connecting people, it's really the one thing that you really want to do as a social worker, and not just check those boxes and do a case plan. The worst thing that I think I've ever seen is social workers who say, well, you're not seeing your kids this weekend because you haven't signed up for a substance abuse class. And no matter what, that's the worst thing that can ever happen, because on the other side of it, and I see it firsthand, because in my family we have, parents that aren't doing well. It's usually drugs or alcohol. And my sister is raising her grandchildren. And what it does to the children, which they don't see their mother, good, bad, or indifferent, even if she's not doing anything, that visit is so important, because it just hurts that child. And it hurts, and it's hard on the caretaker to have to, deal with a child that misses its mother. And no matter what.
And those visits, when I started as a judge, we used visits as a reward. So you did a couple of clean UAs, you got a visit. You went to a couple of parenting classes, you got a visit. That was absolutely backwards. Because the research is so clear now. The average family gets 1 hour visits a week. You add 1 more hour, you triple successful reunification, doing nothing different in the case. You add another hour, you triple it again. You go from 1 1-hour visits to 3 1-hour visits, by a 9-fold increase of success, doing nothing different in the case. It's that value of relationships that Karan's talking about. I mean, it's tribal traditions, but it's also Western science that is meeting tribal traditions at the same place. Relationships are the key.
Yeah, just epigenetics and some of the things that the historical abuse, it does go down generation to generation. So you really need to understand that to work with the families, and not just Native families, all families deserve this. So don't punish the client by not coming to see you. I remember arguing with the social worker because the mom had 8 kids and she could not visit them. And I said, why can't she visit them? Well, she hasn't called me this week. And it's like, what? Because of a quarter, well, it was a quarter to make a phone call at a phone booth. Anybody remember those? I'm aging myself now. But she said, no, she couldn't call. Well, she lived in an area that didn't have phone booths. Some of the reservations still don't have internet. Some reservations just got running water and electricity just 20 years ago. So just because she couldn't call that social worker, you're going to deny her the visit for those children. It was hard on those children, and it was hard on the people that were caring for the children as well. And because there was 8 of them, they had to be split up, and that was really hard. So as we got stronger and better with what we did, we had the less and less need for foster care and adoptions. And we also now have customary tribal adoptions, where the tribe does the adoption order. And some of those turn out well, and some of them did not. So we continuously check on those adopted cases now. We put it right in adoption that usually when you have the adoption, that was success, right? Once you get the adoption worker, they don't see those children anymore. But with a tribal adoption, we will go visit after the adoption is final, just to make sure.
Tribal customary adoption, the Karan don't know, is an adoption without doing termination.
A parental rights.
You don't do a TPR. You don't view the kids as a property. You view them as a center of attention. So you bring in new parents if you need to. You don't cut them off from aunties and uncles and cousins and grandparents.
Yeah, and so, and part of it in the tribal community, the grandparent who was adopting the child didn't want to be called mother. She has a mother already. It didn't make sense. So you get to call me grandma. I don't have to change your birth certificate and become your mother because your mother's right over there. Yes, she's not well right now. She can't take care of you. You live here, but that's your mother. And later on in life, they get to love their mother. That woman gets well, or maybe she doesn't, but she still loves those children, no doubt. So there's no reason that they can't love their mother forever, but they're safe living with grandma. It just didn't make sense. So those are one of those things that we had a vision in our tribal family services, is to really get social workers who cared about the community. And if I ever heard a statement like, well, they got themselves into that mess, that's too bad. You weren't working for me. You were not going to work for me. Yeah, you had to have tough skin and a big heart and be okay with being well hated. So I think I'm going to end there. So Donald has, do I have time?
Yeah, you've got time.
Okay.
I want you to be able to chat. We're good. We got all kinds of time.
So, the one thing that we really wanted to do was break that cycle. And break the cycle of a parent, of that systematic, the family going into foster care, and then those kids going into foster care, that generational pattern. And so we wanted to build the families and give them the resources they need to be good parents when it was their turn to parent, or when it was their turn to be a grandparent. And I remember one case in particular where we were adopting the child out, and this mother was just crying in the hallway. She was just, she couldn't parent. She had some mental health things going on with her, and she just wasn't able to parent at that time. Did you hear it? At that time. Doesn't mean later on in life she couldn't parent or couldn't grandparent. And so I told her, you know what? You need to get yourself ready. You need to get your home together and make that room for her, because I guarantee you, once she's 18, she's coming home. And guess what happened when she came home? She aged out and she went straight home, because where else was she? Heard Judge Thorne's report on the foster care system. Where else was she going to go? So I told her, get ready. And when she does come home, I want you to call me. And so I got that phone call. She go, Karen, something I love hearing. You were right. You were right. She's home. And she's doing good. She's going to college. She's living with me. I'm better. She was managing her condition, and they were a loving family, and it worked out. So don't ever give up on your client, even though they're gonna cuss you out or say really ugly things to you. Let that roll off and just keep going. And it's not about being liked. I can't say that more enough, really. And so, yeah.
Is that good?
Yep, you keep
Go back?
going. Yeah,
Okay.
let me see the
Keep
whole slide.
clicking.
Yeah, there you
Okay.
go.
Whoops.
Whoops.
Trying to be
So,
fancy, do one at a time.
fix the immediate problem, what's going on. Because a lot of the cases were for neglect and, well, they don't have propane and it's cold. And the kids are lighting old furniture up in the backyard. They're starting fire. I said, well, it's raining, so what? They got a burn barrel. It's okay, it's res. It's something that a lot of people do. So what you want to do is fix that immediate problem. They don't have propane, so get them propane. It's an easy fix, you know. Take off your hat and pass it around, and go and call the propane company and get that tank filled. You know, it's an easy fix. They don't need to come and get these children and put them in foster care because it makes you uncomfortable that they're cold. Get them jackets. Fix the immediate problem. There's no need to go into the system where you're not going to see them. You're going to go to Polinsky. You're going to stay there for 30 days. You're going to go in. You're going to go into a foster home. You got to stay in that foster home for 30 days so that foster parents can get paid. No, that's my cousin. She's coming home. We're getting her right now. So it's a system that wouldn't work with us, so we decided to change it. You want to assist with those long-term issues too, especially if there's mental health and drug disease. Get people into substance abuse. It's okay if they fail the first time. It's okay if they fail the second time or third time. They get it at one point in their lives. If they don't, then you know you have to work other ways. Where are we at? So the guiding principles that our office made was to make those connections. Listen, make the connections, share the compassion with others. There's no glory in this. The other thing, I can't believe he put that in the PowerPoint. That's another thing that I say. There's no TR in child welfare. There really isn't. There's no crown. There's no ticker tape parade that you're going to get. It's something that you have to do inside in your heart and have a passion for to really help people and make them change. The other thing is in your offices, you have to have committed staff. You have to have people that want to change and believe that as well and share your passion, or else it just doesn't change. And it's hard, especially when you're working for a county that's so huge and has all those little compartments. We've been so frustrated with tribal housing approval and what is the other word for foster care? Resource family approval. Even though they sat in the same building right next door to each of the cubicles, they couldn't do an application, and then they decided to change into a different tribally approved home, decided to change to the resource family approval. They couldn't get that big old packet that they made the families do. They couldn't go like this over that banner. They made them start all over again. We need copies of your we need originals of your birth certificates, and it just made families frustrated to no end. Because a lot of them didn't qualify for foster care because of records that were 15, 20 years ago. They didn't qualify for it to become a foster home for their own grandchildren. It was a really hard process. So our answer was don't let them get in foster care because it was really difficult to navigate through that system. So part of your jobs as that social worker is to help the families navigate. If you're lucky enough to get into the Indian Specialty Unit, and Donald will talk about this too, it's a lot more active efforts. It's a lot more driving, but it's also a lot more satisfaction when you get to see these families get together and you become a part of our community, and that is possible. Don't be afraid.
Can you distinguish a little
Sure.
bit, you and Judge Thorne? So why with Native families, why with ICWA is it active efforts, and with other families it's reasonable efforts?
Right.
And what that looks like. So I know that I've heard students before who are frustrated when they're talking to a student who's working at a tribal agency about all the things that she's able to do for the family, and then what they're able to do for other families. So if you could touch on that a little bit.
And I think because the proximity, the geographics even, being from the community, knowing the community, you know where the resources are. Being from the county, you have to learn. It's a learning curve. You got to learn that all over again. And to give reasonable efforts, it's beyond my thinking to why doesn't everybody have those active efforts? That's what social work is active efforts for everybody, not just, okay, do this and you got to obey me and, I'll check in 3 months to see if you've done it. No, you drive over there, you pick them up, you take them to the office, you help them with the paperwork, you make sure that they know how to read, you do all of that stuff, and you just keep peeling it back to do those active efforts. And sometimes the Indian Unit workers, they were driving miles and miles. They were in North County, and then they were at East County, and then they're back in North County at night helping me do a tribally approved home. Bringing a kid from East County back to North County, they really ruined some county cars. I know that. But yeah, the active efforts is what true social worker really should be. But on the Native families, a lot of Native families had wood burning stoves, they had dirt floors, and so they have minimal standards as well besides active efforts. So you can't fault or remove kids because they sweep dirt. Those minimal standards, you can't put your own standards onto other families just because you may have grown differently. Just like I can't put my standards onto your families. And I should talk about yard art too. I know one social worker wanted to remove these kids because look at the junk in their yard. Look at that old truck, that old a big old rusted out truck. And it's like, no, you better not say anything. That's my sister, and that's her yard art. She has a reason for that truck. You see those cats up there? You see that thing piled up, but it's slanted? That's so when it rains, the water goes off and into the bowl, and the cats have something to drink. That's don't let the sign on her fence bother you either. It says, with the stop sign, it says you are now within shooting distance or something like that. Don't let that bother you. There are no picket fences. There might be some on some reservations, but many times they have HUD homes. There's allotments and assignments as reservation. We're getting into something deep there, but they really will never own that home. So what you're assessing is not what the home looks like and what's outside of that home. You have to assess the love inside. It doesn't matter what that home looks like. They're not going to spend all their resources in trying to make grass on the Rincon Reservation. Believe me, I've tried, and it's very impossible to have grass and flowers and everything. But you have to judge what's on the inside of that home and the love and the care. And just because they're poor and have yard art that's a different kind, don't judge them.
So Karen, we gotta say bye to a Native mama right now who needs to go get her kids. So if you didn't get to meet Shamice, I'm sorry you didn't have time, but Shamice, I know you need to speak out. You didn't were being so polite.
Tamara has our information if you ever need to get a hold of us or talk to us or have questions. We love fielding those questions. We love to have the interactive. Does anybody have questions up to this point for the judge or I? It's kind of at the end of the day, isn't it? And it's raining and it's cold, but the chips were really good. Okay.
I just knew Shamice had to sneak out and she was trying to be polite. So.
It's okay to get up and go out.
Give the kids a big
Bye-bye.
hug for
Thank
me.
you so much for
Thank
coming.
you.
I wish I could stay, but
I love your medallion. That's beautiful.
thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
Good luck. And the other one had a paper to write, but she wanted to stay too. But we understand it's okay to interrupt. So, Family Justice Integrity Quarterly, I think that was we wrote about the My Two Aunties. So this graphic was done by my nephew, Anthony. And you could see the two aunties right there with basket hats, and that is in kind of the shape of Palomar Mountain, which we live on the base of. And then there's the river where the babies were going downstream. And so we want to show you
The article
that.
about Karen's program is in that journal. You can get it online.
And we're going to show you a real short clip about resiliency court and what the way things can be.
All of you should know that we are here to begin a new process that we think will be revolutionary in terms of how we approach child welfare cases, in terms of how we can empower families to make them resilient. That's why we're calling it the resiliency court.
It's been between 20,000 and 30,000 kids every year for the last 15 years graduate out of foster care. If that happens, 60% of those kids will be homeless, in jail, or dead within 2 years. What can disrupt that number, though, are relationships.
What we want to do is create a center that is called our courts. By utilizing the resiliency court method, we can empower families for future challenges that they may face, where they don't necessarily have to fall back into the old patterns. And it is through your participation, your leadership in your respective courts that will allow us to begin this pilot program.
If I'm a judge, which I'm far from a judge, but if I'm a judge, I'm going to say to somebody and look at somebody and say, you know, this has got to be really intimidating for your community. That here we are up here and I've got all this power. This has got to feel really uncomfortable for you. And I know when I feel uncomfortable, I'm on edge. And I want to appreciate that it's harder to hear when you're on edge. I want to be able to try and help create some safety for you to create more comfort.
How a judge is making their decision and what they're making their decision on does have a ripple effect, even if people don't buy in or they don't believe in it. They aren't going to get what they want if they're acting in ways or focusing in ways that are contrary to what we're trying to achieve.
One of the mistakes that I made as a judge is expecting the therapist to fix the problem. The therapist may be a part of a solution, but as a judge, we can be asking, who else is in your life? We can ask the social worker, what steps have you done to try and facilitate building a network around these parents? We ask the youth, who is it that you miss? Who are you connected to? And the red flag warning comes up if they're not connected to anybody. Then we need to build those connections.
We're humanizing the experience of our kids and families versus dehumanizing. And dehumanizing is when we use power to try and create change versus if we use safety and relationship to be able to come to you and you come to me, human to human. And our systems, unfortunately, and not just the court system, the Viejas system, the CNH system, can be so dehumanizing that I just want to be seen, just as somebody walk out and say, I felt seen and heard in that courtroom. And that is so critical because it moves us as two human beings coming together to achieve what certainly is the well-being of your child.
If we think a certain way, we start to act a certain way. And if we act a certain way, it becomes habit. And if it becomes habit, it becomes us.
Gentleness and kind persuasion win where force and power fail.
And as we think about this shifting to a resiliency court, this idea of power that certainly judges have, referees have, the system has, is that we're going to use our power to change you. We know doesn't work, and yet it's so easy to fall into that seduction of power. I will make this happen.
We can't protect the kids from the world. Problems will always arise. We don't want to put them in active danger. We don't want to subject them to unnecessary harm, but we cannot protect them from the world. But what we can do is we can equip them with survival, to deal with it, to cope with it, and we know what builds resilience.
Allow the person in front of you to make the argument for change. We were always talking about that remap, so you have resiliency to equipping people, motivating people, helping them develop clear action plans, and eventually connect to people. This is around the motivational part.
I think a lot of this is kind of like parenting. If you can sit and lecture your kids all you want and you probably won't see much result, but if you can somehow get them to come up with the idea and own it as theirs, then it just makes the job so much easier. The outcome is so much better.
Because this is something new and different to the culture, you may get a little pushback from institutionalists. Yeah, but this takes more time. Yeah, but sometimes people will go off the rails and they'll just keep blaming someone else. Yeah, but I'm not a therapist. Well, what would it take for us to change our perspective a little bit? Like, what would it take to slow down and say, to ask family members about their motivation, their reason, their vision, so that they own it?
So I think, Judge, you have a tremendous role to direct those involved to not say, all right, we've got to build resiliency in these parents only so that they can get their kid back, absolutely. But simultaneously, how and what are you doing as a caseworker, as a system, beyond just saying he's in therapy? Therapy, to me, doesn't describe resiliency. And so, if he's in therapy, how are these areas being addressed?
With this resiliency approach, there is a natural element of cultural humility that you will learn that will foster better understanding and better communications with families in your courtroom.
For those of us who are making those decisions on the bench, when we have not come from populations that have been marginalized, we can't possibly even understand what that's about. And so the challenge for us is to really focus in early on, and one of the things we've been talking about trying to do is really focus in on the origin story before we get to whatever the issue is. What is the story of this person? What's the story of their family? What is that history? And more important than anything else, that we hear it so that we're thinking about it.
I absolutely see value of what you've learned from that and how it connects into these theories is really interesting to me. So I'm all about it. Whatever I can do to help with training, if we want to try to measure it somehow, whatever I can do, whatever you want my role to be, I'm very happy to be part of this.
Sweet.
Wow. So I'm going to let Bill talk about what he's been doing with Resiliency Court.
So they left me unsupervised during COVID. And so this is what I created, was a resiliency court, where all the things I was telling you as workers, judges need to hear that from their position as well. Because this is a team effort if we're going to succeed. It doesn't help to have horses pulling the different direction. So we need to get judges to understand what trauma is, and then understand how to have a conversation with people. So we ran a pilot program for a year that was just live Zooms, and it's just too hard with people's calendars and schedules. So this last year, we divided up into 20-minute videos. 3 20-minute videos on the safety guide. How do we assess safety, not risk, but safety and threats? 3 on trauma and brain science. 3 on the science of resilience. 3 on what a resilient system looks like. And then 12 on motivational interviewing. Because most of the judges who are making decisions about these people did not come from the same background as these people. So it's important to give them tools to be able to listen and have a conversation as opposed to just issuing orders. So we just finished doing that. We had, the original group was Detroit, Ann Arbor, and 3 tribal courts. And so we did this by Zoom, and it's amazing to hear the judges start to talk to each other about different approaches. You begin to realize that convincing those judges the only success is keeping kids safely with their family. Adoption is a wonderful thing to celebrate, but that's like celebrating a prosthetic. You don't celebrate somebody got a prosthetic after an amputation. You celebrate keeping the foot. The prosthetic is what the least we should do if we terminate, if we amputate. That's the least we should do. But it's better if we can keep that family together.
Once judges get to the point of saying, my only success is keeping the family together, then they stop making excuses to do terminations, to say, okay, you didn't follow your case plan, or you didn't get done in time, or this is taking too long. Because the law allows judges to terminate within a certain time frame, and they got to say that was success. Well, that's like having a car wreck and walking away. That was not success. Success is keeping the family safely together. And once judges started to think about that, they started to approach the cases differently. They began to see not just this background in trauma, but how do I have a conversation? Because as Karan said, they're the expert in their families. Even when they're in denial, they know what's going on. So if you have, one of the advantages of having a client with lots of problems is you can start anywhere. So you let the client say, okay, where are we going to start? And if that's not working, we'll come back in a week or two, then what do we need to do different? Because my job is not to hold you to a plan. My job is to help you succeed. And that's a very different approach. And the judges, Karan heard some of the things today. We had our last session today. Because they're saying, it's a world of difference.
Yeah, Dave, can I add something? I don't, you guys can hear me, right? Yeah, so Judge Thorne took me to my doctor's appointment, and so it was during the time he had a Zoom call, so I got to eavesdrop on those judges and heard them before, but they were talking about the difference in their court. Because the question was, have you seen any differences? And they've seen the world of difference, and just asking the families what got you here and what's different, and listening to them. And some of the judges said they even got letters and emails from the lawyers thanking them because they've seen different clients. A client who never would smile, and one of their most difficult clients said she's never seen her teeth, but doing this motivational interviewing and a different style of interviewing, it was she was smiling and she was now successful. So
people need to be heard. Even if they're in trouble, they need to be heard, that they have a value, that you respect their value, and that you'll listen. You don't have to give them a free pass. I say, okay, we need to get these things done. Where do you want to start? Because normally it's the judge and the caseworkers who say, here's your plan.
yeah.
Even if you have family team meetings, what those meetings are really about is the professionals create the plan, and they give it to the family and tell the family they need to sign off on it. It's different if you're asking the family, where do we start? What do you need to succeed? So when the different hearing in 2 weeks, when the judge says not, you didn't get this done, why not? To instead say, what are the barriers? What do we need to do so you can make this work? Very different approach. And the idea is our goal is not compliance with a plan. Our goal is safely keeping those kids at home. So teaching the judges to ask, instead of, how are you doing in school? Which is a question judges always ask the kids. But instead of asking, who's your best friend in school? When was the last time you saw him? Who do you miss? Family, friends, teammates. Okay, you give me that list. Now, social worker, let's set those up. Let's set those visits up. The kinds of relationships that are important that you don't find out by, are they going to school? Another one, not just are you doing okay, but what do you enjoy? What are you interested in? What are your dreams? And then figuring out how to help, how to connect them to those things. Again, the things that I would do for my grandkids automatically. If my granddaughter said she wanted to ride horses, I'd figure out how to make that happen. But if nobody asked these kids in foster care, what do you dream? What would you like to have? Who do you miss? I want to go to my grandma's birthday party. Okay, let's make it happen. Part of that, what the American Academy of Pediatrics talks about dealing with trauma and stress, is giving the child an ability to cope and control the world around them, which means somebody's listening to them and responding. Not necessarily giving them what they want, but they know they've been heard and somebody's trying to do what they want. That is how you remedy trauma. So I'm going to skip through the rest of those because I want to give Donald a chance to do this. But success is building relationship. And if you do it right, one child, one family at a time, you can impact generations. Because every child you can keep with their family makes it less likely their kids and their grandkids are going into foster care. We can start reducing the numbers in care so that then we can focus our efforts on the families who really need help, instead of trying to supervise way too many people who may not really need us. So this is the noted philosopher Tigger. Life is not about how fast you run or how high you climb, but how well you bounce. Our job is to help the families bounce. They're going to fall, they're going to stumble, they're going to have trouble. Our job is to help them bounce back from it, not to hold them to some perfect standard. Say, when you mess up, and everybody does, we're here to help. That's what the difference is. So thank you.